So Prince Harry finds himself back in the headlines once more, this time for what's being described as a spat with the Sentebale charity chair, which has now had an update from the Charity Commission, which I'll explain in a moment. If you've forgotten what it's about or you didn't know in the first place, it will all become clear, because there's quite some serious allegations made, which were denied and the charity found there was no evidence of. But I'll explain that in a second. First of all, we are here on Black Belt Secrets. Please do subscribe to the channel. We are just teetering under 200,000 subscribers. I'd be really grateful if we push over that threshold. And just before we dive into the first half of the video, a little preview as to what's to come in the second half of the video. If you cast your mind back to 2022, when the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial was going on, well, there was that huge interview, if you remember, afterwards, which I did an extensive video on afterwards. Apparently, according to Brett Cooper, this interview has now disappeared. So much more about that and a bit of a recap in the second half of the video, so please do stick around for that. So now let's talk about the first half. What was this charity? What was it about? And why was there a dispute? Well, long story short, Prince Harry co-founded the charity Sentebale in 2006 to honour his mother, Princess Diana, and the co-founder's mother, Queen Mamohato, focusing on aiding vulnerable children in Lesotho, Botswana, and as a patron he played a significant role in fundraising and raising the charity's profile, including participating in events such as the Sentebale Polo Cup and so on, which is probably now ringing memory bells for you, but then we led into disputes. This, if you had forgotten or didn't know in the first place, this was a scandal, an argument of sorts between Prince Harry and charity trustees. They were introducing new fundraising strategies based on hiring a consultancy in the US and targeting wealthy donors and foundations, and reportedly cost £500,000, but yielded very disappointing results, which obviously led to a lot of tension. Prince Harry and other trustees then questioned the strategy's effectiveness and requested Miss Sophie Chanduka's resignation, the chair of the charity. She refused, and it led to legal action to retain her position. Now, there are also allegations made by her against Prince Harry, which he denied, of bullying and harassment and such like. These claims were around bullying, harassment, misogyny, and Miss Chanduka said that they were trying to force her to leave her position. Now, the Charity Commission investigated these, and they say that based on the evidence provided and reviewed by the Commission, it found no evidence of widespread or systematic bullying or harassment, including misogyny or misogynoir at the charity. But the Commission has acknowledged the strong perception of ill treatment felt by a number of parties to the dispute and the impact that it might have on them personally. Overreach, they go on to say they found no evidence of overreach by either the chair or Duke of Sussex's patron, but the Commission is critical of the charity's lack of clarity in delegations to the chair, which allowed for misunderstanding to occur. And in its conclusions, the Commission said that its assessment of the various accounts that have been provided is that all the charity's then trustees contributed to a missed opportunity to resolve issues which led to the dispute. The regulator observed that strategic and financial opportunities that had emerged for the charity following the COVID-19 pandemic contributed to the tensions that arose. The regulator urges trustees of all charities, if in disagreement, not to lose sight of their charity's best interests or the good work it does for those who need it. As made clear to all parties in the case, if disputes occur, the regulator recommends seeking mediation, showing goodwill and acting in good faith. It encourages all trustees to be mindful to channel their belief in the charity's mission in a constructive and collaborative way. In other words, they've all had a bit of a telling off from the Charity Commission, because in some respects, running a charity is not very different from running a business. You have to get along with people that you're working with, it has to set goals and so on, and abide by certain rules. But at all times, a charity must keep sight of the goal for which it was originally set up. And in doing so, if there are disagreements between trustees, they really do need to sort those out. And to that end, the Commission said that it identified a lack of clarity around the role descriptions and internal policies as the primary cause for weakness in the charity's management. It said it found the confusion exacerbated tensions, which culminated in a dispute and multiple resignations of trustees and both founding patrons. It says the regulator, and this is really quite unusual, the regulators criticised all parties to the dispute for allowing it to play out so publicly, I added the word "so" there, and further concluded that the then trustees' failure to resolve disputes internally severely impacted the charity's reputation and risked undermining the public trust in charities more generally. And it goes without saying that whilst those allegations were made against Prince Harry, he obviously denied them, calling them blatant lies and a publicity stunt by Ms. Chanduka. And the Charity Commission has now said that it found no evidence of such things. But that's not necessarily the end of the matter. It rarely is when things are in the media, in the press, and we have Sky News quoting what they say is a source close to Prince Harry, which may very well be Prince Harry himself. If I just find the quote, it says, whilst sources close to Prince Harry, which may well be Prince Harry or even Meghan Markle, we don't know, but somebody close to Prince Harry says they are keen that they don't lose sight of how devastated he is, describing it as nothing short of a hostile takeover, and saying that the report falls troublingly short in many regards. The former trustees say that they continue to be gravely concerned for the future of the charity. There's more on that on the Sky News article and the Charity Commission article. I'll link both below. Go and check them out. There is always more to these stories. And to be fair, I do know what it's like to be at the receiving end of false allegations and when things are reported and they may leave things out or people may get the wrong idea. So I'll link those below. As always, form your own views. But now let's get back to that mysteriously disappearing interview with Amber Heard. But please do stick around for a quick word about one of my partners. Please don't go away. As an aside, now that the Online Safety Act is well and truly in force and the government has set up this elite police squad to monitor social media for things they don't like, now is absolutely the right time to make sure that you are safe and secure and indeed anonymous when you're online and posting things online. Not that I advocate breaking the law, of course I don't, but it is peace of mind knowing that you've got a cloak of anonymity. And to that end, I use and I am partnered with NordVPN for this video. In fact, I paid for NordVPN with my own money a long time ago and I've used it ever since. It is a virtual private network which gives you access to an anonymous IP address which cannot be tracked. They keep no logs of anything you do and what you visit online, and you can virtually change your location to another country, which gives you access to services which you may not get in this country if they've been restricted. For example, I've seen screenshots and have tested myself certain posts and content on X, for example, that has been restricted in the UK, presumably because of these new laws. But if I use NordVPN and access it from the United States, that content is no longer restricted. And for those of you who are worried, it is absolutely not illegal in the UK to use a VPN, and it is extremely unlikely to ever get banned. And of course, NordVPN has a whole host of security features as well, scanning websites and downloads for malicious content to avoid you getting scammed or hacked. And of course, as they're a partner to my channel, I get you a great discount using the code BlackBeltSecrets to get you 4 months extra free off the service, along with a 30-day money-back guarantee if you change your mind. But once you see it in action and you feel safe and secure and indeed anonymous online, you'll be really glad that you signed up. So don't forget the code BlackBeltSecrets for 4 months extra free. And I thank Nord for sponsoring this video. Okay, so as promised, back to that disappearing Amber Heard interview. Now, first of all, before I get into it, I heard about this from Brett Cooper. Now, whilst I know that it's available elsewhere online, I found out about this because Brett Cooper was talking about it and said that the whole interview from their own TV station had been deleted. Have a listen to what she says.
Amber Heard sat down for a 10-minute-long tell-all piece with Savannah Guthrie from The Today Show. All of them are deleted now. So I had my team pull it. We're going to watch it here, but just know they literally wiped this from the internet.
And so how very interesting, because it just so happens that I have an archive of that video, my original video of that interview. And although they copyright claimed the original video on my main channel, I still have it, and I'm going to watch it, refresh my memory, and tell you a few things that stood out to me, and we might want to go down memory lane. Okay, so having rewatched that interview, and I've made some notes, which is not characteristic for me, but since I can't play you the video because they copyright claimed it, therefore it's in the system, therefore they'll just tag it anyway. In fact, I did try to tag it at the end of this video on the first upload, and it was flagged immediately. I can challenge it, but I thought no point because that would just take time and I just want to get this video out. So I can't play the full interview because they will copyright claim it and tag it anyway. But I've watched it and I've actually come to a few new thoughts about it. Now, you might remember that I did lots of videos on the trial itself on my Black Belt Barrister channel, talking about the judge's comments, how I respectfully disagreed with a lot of what the judge said. I'm quite interested now, actually, to go back and revisit that, because sometimes when you go back and look at things, firstly, you get a new perspective on things, and secondly, you might spot things that you didn't notice the first time. That's just the way of these things. The more you look at things, the more you see. And I think most barristers do this. I'm going off on tangents, forgive me, but most barristers do this. When we write an advice and an opinion, actually, even that's an interesting thing, because some barristers interchangeably write advice and opinion, and they are subtly different things, although some refer to it as the same thing. And advice is, this is what you should do, and this is what the law is. Opinion is, this is how I think the law applies in this situation. So there are subtle differences, but anyway, we digress. When we go back and reread those things, when we've written them, drafted them for clients, we reflect on them. Usually, most barristers I know reflect on them before passing it to the client. And when doing so, you might spot something you didn't see the first time round, or you might have a fresh thought the second time round, or you may come up with an idea as to practically what that client can do moving forward. And there's a reason I'm telling you all this, and that is because having rewatched this interview now, not only is it really clear what that interview was designed to do, but actually looking back, I can actually say, I think Amber Heard did the right thing after all of these interview rounds after the trial. Now, I think it's fair to say that overall, she would have considered that a spectacular failure on her part. Now, you remember one of her counterclaims succeeded to some degree, but the overwhelming result in court in the US was in Johnny Depp's favor. So if you want to go down memory lane and refresh about all of that, I have lots of videos on Black Belt Barrister talking about that. But after all this was done, after the dust settled, after all the interviews were done, she pretty much disappeared and stayed out of the spotlight, stayed out of the media insofar as she could. Now, the media did follow her around, and I did see some photographs of her out shopping and things like that, but by and large, she disappeared. And I think that's probably the best thing that she could have done. Comparing and contrasting that with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, they are doing everything they can to stay in the press and stay in the public eye, whilst they've obviously experienced lots of negativity and backlash against lots of things they've done. Spare, the Oprah interview, everything. There's lots of backlash and negativity surrounding those. And yet they keep coming back in the public eye trying to fix things. And it doesn't seem to be working. But what Amber Heard did was completely disappear, at least for a time. And that sort of allowed the public to move on, which is where I come to this interview, because this interview now strikes me as the parting performance, if you like, because she desperately described a desire to move on, to move forward, to return to normality, and get on with life as though nothing had happened. Now, the other thing I will say, I'll preface this whole interview talk with the following. Looking at my own comments, sort of contemporaneous commentary on that interview, very much there were lots of edits in the interview, which to me suggested that it had been edited, manipulated, twisted, and trying to portray something in a different way, because the original full interview had sections that were chopped out, if you like, that were perhaps unfavorable when people made comments, and so they chopped those out when it was republished. Camera angles is a good way of spotting that. When camera angles change, a bit like when I zoom in and out, there's a bit of behind the scenes. I suppose we are on Black Belt Secrets, but a bit of behind the scenes here. If I stop and think about what I'm going to say for a moment, I might change the zoom on the camera. I don't go to elaborate lengths with B-roll and that sort of stuff, usually. Perhaps I should. Let me know in the comments if you think I should add more B-roll to my videos. Some people say absolutely not. You just want to sit here and listen. That's perfectly fine. But if there is a major edit, I'm stopped to think, I might change to zoom in and out so it's a little bit more natural. What the pros do, because I'm not a professional by any stretch, what they do is have multiple camera angles, and they'll switch between the two, and even one from behind, so you can't quite see what they're saying. You just can see that they are talking. And so it hides edits. And I think there were a lot of edits in that interview. That's the main thing that I observed throughout the whole thing. As to her demeanor, wanting to move on and so on, but also how she tried to minimize what had happened. Like, she tried to describe the whole thing as a petty squabble. Although she was acknowledging that it was serious, she tried to sort of brush it off as just a squabble that somehow made its way into the public eye. You see what I did there? I did the zoom thing because I stopped to think about how I wanted to rephrase what I just said. And so the zoom makes it a little bit more natural, I think. Anyway, let me know. Maybe it doesn't. But one of my other comments on her video all the way through was that her careful choice of language, which says to me that she had been sitting down with a lawyer to talk about how to phrase things in this interview to avoid relitigation and new claims of defamation. There were some things that she said that I think were dangerously close to defamation and possibly could have been actioned. But overall, she had certainly couched her language very carefully to potentially avoid relitigation. And then throughout the interview and looking at the body language, the way she was talking about the evidence and her discussion of the audio recordings and various bits of evidence that came out in that trial, to me, she seemed very inconsistent as a witness throughout, which I think is what the jury would see. There's questions over her credibility, and she was trying to convince the jury that she wasn't wrong, and obviously the jury just didn't agree with that. Whereas comparing and contrasting that with the evidence of Johnny Depp, which I felt was calm, collected, consistent, believable, even likable, which I think swayed the jury to a large extent. And then there was the comparison between how events were portrayed and whether they were consistent. So Johnny Depp, for example, with regard to the injury to his hand, as against Amber Heard's description of the injury to her face when she was describing the wrong side of her face, and even the extent of the injuries and whether that was believable, whether that was credible. There was a lot of things in that interview that were, to me, telling of the entire story. And this just really made me want to go down memory lane looking at the original judgment, which now, several years on, I still find is one of the most interesting cases we've looked at for quite a long time. And possibly the most interesting case that I've ever talked about on my channels here. Obviously, the vast majority of them were on Black Belt Barrister, but I think we should go down memory lane and look at some of those, because there's a lot to learn from how that trial ran, both in the UK, in the United States, of course, with Amber Heard not being the primary party to the case in the UK, which did make quite a bit of difference. And I had my own criticisms of the judgment in that trial, bearing in mind she wasn't party to the claim itself. She was just providing evidence. But for me, there are a lot of questions that remained over her credibility, why the judge ruled as he did. And I think perhaps if the judge went back on it, having the benefit of the US trial, perhaps that UK trial would have resulted differently with a different judgment. So let me know what you think. Do you want to go down memory lane? I've been really interested. I've sat for a while going through this interview, and I've even gone back and watched some of my old videos. So I'll link some of them below. Go and have a look. Maybe we can all have a trip down memory lane talking about these. But thank you for joining me for these. I found it really interesting. Thank you for watching. As always, please do subscribe to Black Belt Secrets. We are just shy of 200,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you next time.